Welcome to the University of Pittsburgh Health and Explainable AI podcast, a collaborative initiative between the Health and Explainable AI HexAI Research Laboratory and the Department of Health Information Management at the School of Health and Rehabilitation Sciences, and the Computational Pathology and AI Center of Excellence, CPACE, at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine. I'm your host, Jordan Goss-Poire, a health and science reporter. In this podcast series, we explore the transformative integration of responsible and explainable artificial intelligence into health informatics, clinical decision-making, and computational medicine. From reshaping diagnostic accuracy to enhancing patient care pathways, we'll highlight how AI is creating new bridges between researchers, clinicians, and healthcare innovators. Led by Ahmad P. Tafti, Houman Rashidi, and Liron Pantanowitz, the HexAI podcast is committed to democratizing knowledge around ethical, explainable, and clinically relevant AI. Through insightful conversations with domain experts, AI practitioners, and students, we'll spotlight the latest breakthroughs, discuss real-world applications, and unpack the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead in responsible AI in healthcare. So, whether you're a student, practitioner, researcher, or policymaker, this is your gateway to the future of AI-powered healthcare. Today, on this podcast episode, we're going to speak with George Damiris, Associate Dean for Research and Innovation at the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing and a Penn Integrates Knowledge University professor. And we're going to discuss the integration of AI into nursing and into elder care and hospice care. Welcome, George. Thank you so much for joining us. Would you like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to Penn?
Thank you for having me. I'm George Damiris, and my background is in health informatics. I actually have a PhD in health informatics from the University of Minnesota. And ever since my doctoral studies, I have been looking at ways that we can design and evaluate technology for older adults to help people age in place and support people as they age and their families. I came to Penn in 2018. I have a joint appointment in the School of Nursing and then in biomedical informatics in the School of Medicine. And one of the reasons that I was excited to join Penn was the opportunity to conduct interdisciplinary research across campus and build bridges with nursing, engineering, informatics, communication, and many other disciplines, since the type of work I do, focusing specifically on aging and technology, requires that type of interdisciplinary approach.
Your profile page at the University of Pennsylvania states that your research focuses on the transformative role that information technology can play in the healthcare of older adults and their families, and on the generation of innovative personal health solutions in home and hospice care. Can you give us an overview on Penn School of Nursing, and then tell us more about your role at Penn and your particular interests?
At the University of Pennsylvania in the School of Nursing, we are really embracing innovation, and we are seeing all these emerging technologies as potential tools to improve person-centered care. So obviously at the core, we always have the patient and their families. And the different technologies can become powerful tools in improving efficiency, effectiveness, or potentially supporting new models of care. But ultimately, we are looking for solutions that are patient-centered, engage the stakeholders and mostly patients, families, and the communities, and are really also clinically meaningful and relevant. My own research has been focusing on the design of technology solutions for older adults in their homes. And so that includes a variety of systems. For example, I have been doing work in the space of smart homes, looking at passive sensing that can allow us to better understand how people engage in activities of daily living. The use of these sensors, let's say motion sensors or door and window sensors that tell you how people move in their home, is to actually help us better understand when things change. So obviously, you don't necessarily need a human at the other end to watch the data points come in real time, but rather to develop the right algorithms so that when you have a deviation from what would be the normal pattern for one individual, you would be notified much sooner. So the whole idea with this smart home research is really to facilitate a more proactive approach. Right now, we're waiting for an adverse event to happen, and then we're trying to minimize the impact as people transition through different settings of care. But with the right technology, potentially we can support people and help them stay safe and independent before actually the adverse event happens. Another example along those lines is a project we are engaging in called Sense for Safety, which uses depth sensors to facilitate fall prevention. So depth sensors have been used quite a bit in the gaming industry. They basically create silhouette extraction. So unlike videos that create real images of the person, they could be potentially more privacy preserving. The system we use allows us to calculate gait characteristics such as stride length and gait speed that ultimately help us figure out that individuals' fall risk score. So the likelihood that they may be experiencing a fall. And as those numbers change, we can actually intervene, whether it is through home modification, through exercise programs, or just other low-cost fixes to help people stay safer. And in some cases, it might be that people need to talk to the healthcare provider for a medication change. But this type of system allows us to understand how the risk for falling changes over time and what can be done proactively. And so with this specific project, we're looking at community dwelling older adults with mild cognitive impairment who live alone and are therefore at the highest risk of experiencing a fall, and hoping to create a solution before the fall happens so that the fall does not happen.
You mentioned passive sensors. It's true. These can be quite useful, can't they?
Even low-cost solutions, with wandering behavior, they have found that just when you open the door after midnight, having a voice recording that says, no, it's still midnight, it's time to go back to bed, has actually been quite effective for people who live alone and sometimes, may leave the residence in after hours and be in danger.
You mentioned that you started at Penn in 2017. Thinking about technology making its way into nursing, you've obviously seen a lot of changes and you've heard a lot of concerns, haven't you?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of changes happening drastically, and there is proliferation of all kinds of technologies. Now, as we talk more about AI, sometimes people will raise the concern, will this replace me? And actually, I don't think that that's a concern for nursing. Obviously, we will need to prepare the next generation of nurses who will have more AI literacy and who will be ready to embrace and implement those tools. AI is here to stay, and it does have a place in healthcare, but nurses are the patient's advocate. And while they provide care, they're also the ones who represent the patient's voice. So I actually think with the growth of AI, nurses have an even bigger role to play, not only in being the clinicians that they are in taking care of patients and families, but also ensuring that those AI tools or other technologies are ethically introduced, that they're appropriate, that they capture the patient's preferences and wishes. I have a colleague who Dr. Ulrich talks about the moral agency of nurses and how during this growth of AI, we need to ensure that nurses are the ones who are making sure that those tools capture the patient's voice, but also that nurses advocate for transparency, explainability, and all those other attributes that AI systems need to have.
In preparing for your interview, I noticed Penn's Penn AI Tech Initiative. Can you tell me a little bit more about the initiative and what makes you excited about it?
I'm very excited about Penn AI Tech. Penn AI Tech stands for Penn Artificial Intelligence and Technology Collaboratory for Healthy Aging, and it's an initiative funded by the National Institute on Aging. This allows us to fund small pilot projects, not only from academic partners, but also from industry and health systems that explore the use of AI and other advanced technologies to improve quality of life and outcomes for older adults and their families. We have a very broad spectrum of projects in our portfolio, projects that range from using AI to provide companionship and address loneliness and social isolation, all the way to how we can better use AI for predicting or detecting cognitive decline in medical imaging, in genetic testing, in everyday conversations, how we can better support decision making for patients and caregivers, So it actually spans across biology of aging, day-to-day living, community health, home healthcare. The exciting aspect of this collaboratory is not only that we get to work with a lot of different disciplines. We have academics from engineering, computer science, informatics, nursing, medicine, gerontology, but also from industry, work with healthcare practitioners, engage stakeholders, and also address the multiple challenges around introduction of AI in aging. Those include not only the technical and clinical challenges, but obviously the ethical challenges as well. We have a stakeholder core that allows us to engage stakeholders in these initiatives. So actually, all our pilot projects get to work to real people, real patients, and their families as they design those projects to ensure that those technologies actually reflect people's voices, and then they get to deploy and test them. The collaboratory is looking for innovative, in some cases, high risk projects that would otherwise not have received funding for a 1 year deployment, with the goal to accelerate the growth of innovation specifically in the space of aging and technology. Most of the projects, about 2/3, are funding solutions for Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. About 1/3 fund solutions for general aging, as well as chronic conditions or other challenges that older adults may face, not only Alzheimer's disease. I think we have already seen in the past 5 years a lot of projects with very successful outcomes where they've been able to, based on the pilot data they generated, go on to develop business plans and become profitable if they're industry partners, or look at next phase for larger clinical trials if they're academic partners. So our funding has been more seed funding, but we are really proud to have introduced the dialogue and have introduced the consideration of all those different implications of AI for all our participants. We see the collaboratory kind of like a living laboratory where all those issues are being brought and addressed, including technical developments, deliberations around ethical issues, but then also trying to ensure that the clinical space doesn't try to always catch up with the technological advances, but rather we get to say what are the acceptable solutions that we need. And rather than having technology drive the solution, we want the problem to be the one that actually is defining the types of solutions we need.
On the podcast, we try to incorporate questions from industry and academia. In this case, we have a question for you from Vivek Nallur, who's an assistant professor of computer science at University College Dublin. Vivek specializes in AI ethics and autonomous machines. For example, AI ethics surrounding uses of autonomous systems in nursing and elder care. To preface your question, Vivek writes that the advent of AI raises the potential for personalized medicine in a way that was never possible before. However, given that it is personalized, what are the cognitive failure modes that we should be thinking about? For instance, one could seek a second opinion from a different doctor when personalization is not the norm. However, with personalization, will second opinions vanish or become useless? So, will there be a tendency on the part of medical personnel to not question a computer's decision or advice? And what are the implications for autonomy in the age of AI-based personalized medicine?
This is, I think, a really, really great question, and one that obviously is not easy to answer, but it's important to bring at the forefront. A couple of years ago, there was a commentary on Nature Medicine by McGrattan and her colleague who introduced the term algorithmic paternalism, the idea that oftentimes we tend to think that if automation or AI or the algorithm says something, it's most likely accurate or something we should be following. It's the golden rule. And that obviously introduces a lot of dangers. More specifically, in the context of AI, we do also have the concern of not only losing aspects of the personalization by over-trusting those systems, But in many cases, I think if we envision a future by which we put in the symptoms into a machine and wait for the machine to spit out the diagnosis and the solutions, we could be also, in a way, leading to skill atrophy for the clinicians. We're solely relying on the AI to tell us what is going on, and we're just following the steps that are being recommended. I think as we see those dangers, it's important to ensure that there's always the human in the loop, as we say, to ensure that AI is not being seen as a decision maker or the ultimate decision maker, but rather as a tool or a team member, and to ensure that the human is actually, or the clinician is actually the one who is overseeing the whole process. And one of the aspects in terms of how to practically implement this has to do with explainability, and also a term that is often used, the self-reflective AI, namely allowing for us to understand how decisions are being proposed or recommended, how the algorithm functions, and also have the system create the safeguards by which it highlights the limitations of the reasoning. So we don't actually just wait for the system to generate a solution or a recommendation and we have to follow it, but rather we actually get insights into a thought process that can be critiqued, expanded, modified, while always allowing for the clinician to be in charge. Another concern I have sometimes as we think about scenarios of automation is that we would lose the patient's voice or the patient's preferences in that process. And that's where I think we also need to ensure that as we design those AI systems, not only do we have the clinician be in charge, but that there is room for the patient's voice and preferences to be captured and be part of that decision making. Ultimately, the decisions are to be made not by AI. AI is really just a decision aid, like many others we already have, and they can be quite powerful, but they should not be the sole source of a decision, a diagnosis, a treatment decision. And I think sometimes as we get fascinated by what technology can do, we think about scenarios of full automation in healthcare, where if that were the case, just like in the example of the question, we would lose not only personalization, but actually we wouldn't even have a chance to correct these biases, the automation bias, the anchoring bias, all those biases that would be perpetuated through an AI system. So I see those tools being powerful, but only under the right parameters and framework of humans controlling them.
There's always been devices on the market targeting elder engagement, and new smarter devices are emerging, like LEQ from Intuition Robotics. You've touched on this already, but what's your take on AI companions for elderly individuals who are suffering from loneliness, memory loss, or other cognitive disorders? And looking far into the future, where is nursing and elder care heading? And should you and I look forward to being these AI companions' next patients?
I definitely think that digital companionship devices are a reality. And actually, even for Penn AI Tech, we see a lot of applications that propose pilot testing of all kinds of companionship tools. Clearly, AI can facilitate the creation of so-called conversational agents. And this can be a really powerful solution for people who need to stay cognitively engaged or need companionship. And there have been pilot studies that have shown really encouraging results for people with or without cognitive impairment using these types of conversational agents in their everyday living. Some of these solutions are providing a health coaching aspect so they can remind you of your medication or an upcoming medical appointment. Others may be more talking such as a mental health counselor. And I think while this is a really promising tool, we also see, especially in the news, the unintended consequences and the dangers of using generative AI and conversational agents in spaces where mental health issues are being either discussed or should be identified. There's been a lot of discussion around how or whether those tools should be addressing suicidal ideation. are the models that being used the appropriate ones to deal with complex issues that an individual is facing? I think that I would make a couple of observations in that space. As with everything else, there is not one solution that will work for everybody, for every older adult, or for every health condition. And we have seen in preliminary work that some people actually truly enjoy a conversational agent and others do not at all. There are people who feel comfortable sharing intimate thoughts and feelings with an AI tool and others who are not. And then when we talk about cognitive impairment, there is that whole ethical question of deception. To what extent is it appropriate for a person to feel like they're actually talking to somebody else who is alive, who is another human being, if this is going to have some therapeutic benefits for them? As a matter of fact, some of these solutions may work better if the person is to believe that they are talking with an actual other human being, or at least being. And then there's questions around, could this also be used for inappropriate purposes? What about dignity, respect, autonomy? I think those are complex issues. I don't want to minimize the promising preliminary findings of all those different solutions, because we've seen a lot of studies that show for some populations and some groups, there are potential benefits from those solutions. And we clearly do not have enough healthcare workers or trained professionals to deliver the services that we need to deliver. So I think we have to look into the solutions, but at the same time, maybe be a little bit more proactive in minimizing those unintended consequences, or at least setting the parameters that will control what the system should and should not be doing.
On the podcast, we like to ask our guests to offer students a research project idea. What's something that you would love to see students work on?
Actually, I think this is a really interesting question. I am interested in how AI can help with decision support when patients and families have to make difficult decisions about transitions in care, having to move out from their own home, let's say, to moving to assisted living or some other type of arrangement. And oftentimes we don't really know when is the right time. How do we honor people's preferences? What data do we use to make these difficult decisions? And so I think a challenge is, can we use AI to, whether it is through a combination of hardware, wearables, whatever this may be, to better understand when it's no longer safe for somebody to be living alone in their home? Not in a monitoring fashion where we just put in cameras in people's homes, but something that potentially over time can give us more insights as to, are there things that can be mitigated? For example, just because somebody doesn't go up the stairs as easily as they could before, that doesn't mean they should move out or change their setting of care. In other cases, if they cannot engage in activities of daily living independently, maybe they need more assistance. So how can we use AI to get better insights into what is going on in the home and use those insights for better decision support when it comes to making decisions about new models of care, different models of care, or potential transitions of care?
You've collaborated on a number of papers focusing on uses of technology by caregivers in hospice settings. Can you tell us more about your work in this area?
One project I didn't get to mention earlier has to do with caregivers of persons with dementia in hospice. So those are people at the end of life who are receiving hospice services, usually in their own home. And so we are recruiting family caregivers, and those can be the family, friends, or others who are assuming those informal caregiving tasks, but are critical for the end of life experience for the patient. So we've been looking at ways to support family caregivers. In one specific clinical trial, we have been looking at a problem-solving therapy intervention that can actually help caregivers cope better. So there is an actual therapist working with them over 3 sessions with a structured curriculum to look at problem solving and attitudes to problems and challenges. In that clinical trial, we have had the opportunity to talk to caregivers about AI, given that there is this anticipation that AI might be able to help. And what we have found is that obviously, as you can imagine, several caregivers have never used AI or are not interested in using AI or feel intimidated about how AI could be used. Whereas others, especially younger caregivers, have used ChatGPT and other types of generative AI tools quite a bit to make decisions about care services, to have a better explanation about symptoms that their loved one may be experiencing. And even as we saw when it came to pain management, sometimes caregivers take care of a loved one who is no longer verbal. And so they often feel anxious to detect if their loved one may be in pain. And how do you interpret sounds or facial expressions or gestures? So I was surprised to hear that several caregivers do use generative AI tools just in hopes of better understanding what is going on or what they should be expecting down the road. So AI does have a role to play. I think it also is a really powerful tool when you think about its ability to create different outputs for the same information. Just like when we use ChatGPT and say, please explain this information to me as if I were 15 years old, as if I were 5 years old, as if English were my second language. The fact that we can create multiple outputs of the same messaging can be quite powerful when it comes to patient education. And I also see a great role in the whole informed consent space. Right now, unfortunately, informed consent is a document that people have to sign, when in reality, it needs to be a process that evolves over time. People learn more and change their mind. They may have more questions, less questions at the beginning, and the information needs to be adapted to the individual's literacy levels and language preferences. And so I think AI can play a great role there as well. That is all to say that there is a role for AI as an information aid above and beyond the things we've been discussing earlier in terms of doing things, providing services, robotics, and so forth. It can be a powerful tool when it comes to just understanding people's information needs and providing the right information. Now, the assumption is that the information is the right one and it's accurate. And so, as we know, generative AI so far has not always been the most reliable source of information. But I think as we improve those systems, they can actually become powerful in helping patients and families navigate that space.
From the vantage points of Pitt's HexAI Lab and Pitt's Computational Pathology and AI Center of Excellence, in what ways can universities collaborate more closely with industry in 2026? And can I ask you to touch on data sharing and synthetic data generation?
I think obviously there's great opportunities for collaboration, not only with industry, but within academia as well. And we have to collaborate with other groups because everything moves so fast. As a matter of fact, academia moves so slowly compared to industry that we sometimes start investigating something that has completely evolved by the time we receive the funding and start a clinical trial for whatever it is we're studying. So we have to find new models to collaborate more effectively. And I do think data sharing and figuring out how to best create the right infrastructure for data repositories will be critical. There are already tools in place, such as data use agreements and memoranda of understanding. But those take time. And given the bureaucracy that happens in academia, sometimes just a simple data use agreement between two academic sites can take 6 months until it's signed. So you can imagine for more complex issues that can take a year or two. And that may be prohibitive for the types of collaborations we're talking about, especially in the space of AI. So while I'm thinking it is really important to keep safeguards and ensure that everything is done to ultimately protect the patients or the people whom the data that we have collected the data from, we need to think of more flexible structures to make those agreements happen. And as you mentioned, synthetic data can play a great role and in many cases bypass the burden of having real patient data that you want to share, which requires a lot of steps to make it happen. We have to be more creative in creating these partnerships. I think another important aspect is that every university has unique expertise. And sometimes in spaces like this, where you need to bring the clinical experts, the technical experts, the ethicists, the communication experts, the nurses, the physicians together, you may want to create a consortium of experts from different institutions that will also ensure more different, not only different perspectives, but obviously more generalizability for your findings if you deploy different tools in different populations across the country. I think it will be critical for academia to strengthen partnerships with industry, but also with other academic sites, and find more flexible structures to do that, or do that in a more expedited fashion.
Before we close, we like to offer our guests an opportunity to promote their universities. As a takeaway, what's something exciting at Penn that you'd like to tell us about?
Yes, I think at Penn we have a campus-wide initiative called Penn AI that captures AI efforts in a lot of sectors, including business, healthcare, the environment, and many others, with a lot of AI expertise in all the different schools. It is definitely a priority for us on campus, as I'm sure it is for most institutions. And actually, our engineering school offers an AI undergraduate degree that was the first among Ivy League's undergraduate degree in AI. This is definitely an area that is causing a lot of excitement for our faculty and students. And it is what I find a big strength on our campus is really that interdisciplinary approach, that if you want to do great things with AI, you will still get exposed to social sciences and ethics, regardless of the perspective one takes in that AI space. You do need to recognize the implications of that work at the broader scale. And I think that more holistic view of AI is one of the priorities here on the Penn campus.
All right, George, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on Pitt's Health and Explainable AI podcast today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. From the University of Pittsburgh, thanks everyone for tuning in and for following the series. Join us again on HexAI, where we explore the transformative integration of responsible and explainable artificial intelligence into health informatics, clinical decision-making, and computational medicine.